Hello, welcome to another video from the conscientious biologist, Ben Gallagher. This is the first one in the evolution series, and it looks at variation. Now, within variation, there's two main influences. You've got genetic influences and you've got environmental differences. In this video, we're going to look at what variation is and what those two types of influence can be. This is from the GCSE specification, and if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to my channel. Thank you. So let's think about this concept of variation. Variation just means how all of the organisms on Earth can vary from one another and how they've become so different and so distinct. But there's no way we could look at everything, the 5 different kingdoms of life, and especially when you think about both prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms, there's no way we could look at all of the variation. So let's just stick to humans and let's just stick to faces. And if I pull up a load of different faces of famous people, these are all actors or models, look at the difference, the variation that we've got just in the faces of these people. Not just in the obvious things, not just in things like skin colour and hair colour, but you've got totally different variations in nose shape, in eye type, in the set of the brow, in the musculature around the cheeks. Even when you look at something like David Bowie up there, he's got 2 eyes, one of each colour. It's a condition called heterochromia. Even little subtle things like that can create this mass of beautiful variation. But there must be some main contributing factors for why all of the humans on the planet are so different from one another. And this is just a very small selection of all the people. You know, I haven't got anyone from here, anyone here from Bolivia. I haven't got anyone really from the Mediterranean or anything. You know, this is a very small snapshot of the wide and amazing variation that we've got on this planet. So let's look at what causes that variation. Now, one of the major causes of variation is genetics. So if we think about where someone comes from, we're talking about a sperm and an egg, and within those 2 cells there's a nucleus containing DNA. That's 50% of the DNA from the father in the sperm, 50% of the DNA from the mother in the egg. When those 2 come together at fertilization, they're going to form a zygote cell. That zygote is the fertilized egg that contains 100% of genetic information now. That zygote is going to divide by mitosis. It's going to form an embryo, multiple cells. Those cells are going to divide, specialize, differentiate until they turn into a person. Okay. Now, that person, me in this case, is a result of the sperm and egg fusing together. So it's a mixture of those 2 parents. But I need you to start thinking about genetic variation on a much broader, much older scale. Because whilst it's true that I am from my mother and father, and the proteins encoded for in the DNA that they gave me give me most of my features and my uniqueness, it's not just my mum and dad who contributed to that. So here's my mum and dad. I've got old photos of them, but I'm 50-50 of them. Each one of them gave me 50% of their DNA. However, their DNA came from their parents. So these are my 4 grandparents. Now, this is the key thing. I am not 25% of each of my 4 grandparents. It doesn't work like that. Because whilst my dad over there, he's 50% of each of his 2 pet grandparents, Hazel, Emily and Gerard Raymond. He's 50% of each of them. But what he gave me was any random mixture of those 2. So in the 50% that came from my dad, he might have given me 49% from my grandmother and just 1% of my grandfather. That might be the 50% that he gave me. So that would mean what he gave me was almost entirely DNA from my grandmother. Or it could have been the other way around. Or it could have been a 30-20 split or a 28-22. It doesn't matter. My dad gave me a random mixture of his 2 parents, as did my mum. So it could be that I'm a 10% one grandma, 40% one grandfather, 15% the other grandfather, and 35% that one. You're a random mixing of those 4. And then, of course, you go back another generation and we're up to 8. These are my 8 great grandparents. I'm very lucky in my family that we've got photos going back that far. But I'm a random mixture of these 8. And again, that's a total rejigging and reassortment. For example, I might be, let's look up in the top corner up there, of Lewis Godsall. I might only have, say, 1% of him in me. Or if my nan, Betty Sylvia, above me, let's say by random chance she got entirely her dad's DNA, none of her mum's, and if she then gave my mum entirely his DNA, it could be that I am 50% that man 3 generations back. We just don't know. It's this random mixing, and it's that level of mixing of genetics that gives us such massive variation, because every single person that's born is a random mixing of all the ancestors that have come before them. That's a lot of reshuffling of DNA. Now, as well as genetics playing a massive part on variation, you also have this factor of your environment. And when we're talking about environment, I'm not talking about whether you live in the jungle or whether you live in a desert or something like that. I'm talking about the environment around you as you grow up and how your surroundings and your upbringing influence you. So environmental influences. So let's put a few things on here to give you some ideas on this. If I put that baby up there, that baby's surrounded by a loving family, that loving family who are going to nurture him, show him that he's wanted, show him that he's cared for, feed him good food, give him good nutritional input, send him to a good school, he gets educated, he gets cared for, he gets a head start in life. That child is going to grow up very, very different to one of these children. So if you had one of these children, child living on the streets somewhere, very poor place, very bad country, their parents might be entirely absent, they might have been killed. These kids essentially bring themselves up on the streets with no real love, no real care, no one to help them out, minimal education, very poor nutrition. But still, when they were born, they would have been exactly the same as the first child, but they would have turned out very, very differently, both in physical stature because of what nutrition or whatever they've had, but in attitude and emotional range, so much stuff because of the environment and surroundings that they grew up in. Something much more simple and a bit light-hearted, this, going out in the sun, getting a suntan. If you go out in the sunshine, you're going to go darker, you're going to go brown, because your skin cells in response to sunlight create more melanin protein. Melanin is the brown coloured protein that's very high, naturally high levels in the skin of black people. But I'm much browner now, it's been a nice summer, I'm much browner now than I was 4 months ago. That's because of the environment. It's because of the sun when you're outside. This isn't my natural skin tone from when I was born. It's influenced by my environment, by the sun. If I pull this picture up, this is another load of films that I'm a big fan of, the Rocky films. You may have never even heard of those, but this is Sylvester Stallone and Dolph Lundgren. This from Rocky IV. This is a great photo, though, for us to talk about environmental influence and genetic influence. Because if you look at these two men, look at Sylvester Stallone, the shorter guy, and Dolph Lundgren, the much bigger guy. Look genetically at their differences. One's very, very tall. One's quite short, one's got blonde hair, one's got brown hair, they've got different shaped faces. But environmentally, look at them, they're both very, very muscular. Now, they weren't born as crazy muscular babies. Environmentally, they changed that. They went to the gym, they lifted loads of weights, they got really, really muscular. So that's a result of their environment. But as well as that, this photo is really useful. Because in the film, Sylvester Stallone was playing an American, Dolph Lundgren was playing a Soviet Russian back from when it was the Soviet Union. So they were brought up in very, very different countries, one capitalist, one communist, with very different ideals, very different sets of ethics. So their entire belief systems could be very, very different. And that's because of the environment and the country that they were born in. And along with that, of course, their language. They speak different languages because of the environment that they were born in. If you've got a child who's born in France, he's going to speak French. You take the same child and he's born and brought up in England, he's going to be speaking English, assuming English parents. So there's a lot of differences that can be shown just in this picture. If we look at the next one, Harry Potter, I like the Harry Potter films as well. Harry Potter famous for having that scar. Well, you're not born with scars. You can be born with birthmarks, which would be where some skin cells have developed some strange pigmentation that might stay with you for life. But a scar is caused by injury. So a scar is purely environmental. It's not, you're not genetically predisposed to have a scar. Something happens, you get injured, you develop a scar. But some people, of course, deliberately scar themselves and put ink into it. So here's a tattoo. Now, in this case, someone's got a tattoo of a neuron tattooed onto their back. Bit strange, but it's biological at least. But a tattoo, you're not born with them. They're environmental. There's something about you that can be unique, but that's entirely caused by your environment. This guy sneezing next to me here. This as well, environmentally caused illness, catching a cold. It's the coronavirus pandemic at the moment. It's what stimulated me to make all these videos, because students aren't in school at the moment. But getting ill from a pathogen, a virus, a bacteria, a fungus, or something like that, that's something in your environment that can make you ill. That's not to say your genetics can't make you ill, because there's lots of genetic diseases, lots of genetic conditions that you can be born with. But catching an illness, catching a pathogen, that's entirely environmental. So what we're saying is that environmental influence are things that happen to you during your lifetime, and they can cause environmental variation, and they're caused by the environment that you live in. But just as something interesting to think about, what about identical twins? So these guys, still going back to Harry Potter, this is James and Oliver Phelps, who played the Weasley twins in the Harry Potter series. Genetically identical, because if you think back to that previous diagram where with the sperm and the egg, they fertilize to make a zygote. What happens in identical twins is when the zygote divides into two, instead of staying together and then becoming 4, 8, 16 and so on, they separate, and each one grows separately into a human. So it's one sperm and one egg forming one zygote, which when it splits, separates, and they each grow into a person. But they're genetically identical. However, are identical twins totally identical? No, of course they're not. Because of their environment, they're each going to have had slightly different perceptions of the world that they grow up in. They're going to have slightly different friendship groups. They might enjoy slightly different subjects. Anything that is environmental is going to make genetically identical twins become more different and increase their variation. So let's just look at a few examples of this. This is just to try and link up some of the biology from different areas of the course and to get you to think about this. We're going to look at genetic or environmental influence, and we're going to do this on a scale here, saying something can be 100% genetically influenced or 100% environmentally influenced. And we're going to pick a load of characteristics here. So let's start over on 100% environmental. Well, scars are 100% environmental. You're not born with them. If you get injured and the injury is serious enough, it can cause a scar. So that's 100% environmental. If we go to the other end of the scale, eye colour, 100% genetic. Now, interestingly, your eye colour does change over the first few months of life. Quite a few babies are born with blue eyes and they darken, they end up having brown eyes. But generally, your eye colour is down to the proteins you make in the iris of your eye, how they reflect light, and that doesn't really change. If light hits your eyes in different ways, they might appear to be different colours, but the proteins never really shift in there. So your eye colour is 100% genetic. But what about something like skin colour? We talked about skin colour in the first slide. Is it genetic or is it environmental? Well, I'm going to put it there because, yes, traditionally thinking about black people and white people, yes, that is genetic. But, of course, the shades can vary once you introduce suntan and it can move one way or another, okay? Of course, you can also throw in there's some conditions like vitiligo where the skin forms patches of different colours. Or of different levels of melanin. They don't turn sort of blues and purples and stuff, but it can form patches. So again, you've got another level of variation in there. Let's put in aggression. Aggression's a really good one to think about, and how aggressive someone is, because it's kind of representative of any personality trait. But aggression, I'm going to put there. And remember, these are only in my opinion. You might decide that they're shifted elsewhere. I'm basing these on just my knowledge and my interpretation, which could be wrong because these are all subjective ideas. No one really knows where they fit. But aggression, I put it towards the genetic end because aggression is largely based on levels of testosterone and neurochemicals in the brain that can cause some people to be more aggressive than others. But it's got a massive environmental influence because if you're brought up in very aggressive surroundings, you're surrounded by aggression and violence, or you need to be aggressive to survive, you're going to be a more aggressive person. So I'm putting it kind of in the middle, but leaning towards genetic for me. Language, way over here on environmental. If you're born in one country, you're going to be speaking the language of that country. Gender. This is a really interesting one at the moment. The last couple of years has become a massive topic because gender kind of depends on what we're talking about. From a biological point of view, we might go, well, we're talking chromosomes. Are we talking, have they got an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, in which case they're male, or an X chromosome and an X chromosome, in which case they're female? But it's nowhere near that simple, and biology is absolutely starting to recognize and understand that, because it doesn't just depend on what reproductive organs you've got. Most of what makes you male or female is actually what's going on inside here. And we know that neural development, right back to in the fetus as it's growing within the mother, the neural development is down in large part towards the level of androgen hormones that are present in the womb. And depending on what the level is, it might put the neuronal connections, the levels of neurotransmitter, how the two hemispheres of the brain connect to each other. It might orientate the brain in a very male way or in a very female way. So you could have chromosomally males, but by androgen levels, a very female brain. So it gives you this whole idea of genders being a bit more fluid. If you throw things like sexual preference into there, and whether someone's gay or straight or any of the myriad of variations in between, well, we don't really know what drives that. And actually, if you look at a lot of animals in the animal kingdom, they don't really seem to have it. A lot of animals would just breed with whatever animal is nearest to them. So we don't really know where gender and things like that fit, but it's definitely a genetic influence, even if it's the genetic influence over the level of androgens that affect the brain. It seems to be less likely that someone, due to their environment, that their environment's going to turn them from boy to girl. They just think. Generally, people are born how they were born. It might take people a long time to realise what they are, but gender seems to be a genetic influence. Height and size, how tall you are, how big you are, how bulky you are. Height and size, I'm going to put way over here on genetic, but not entirely, because everyone has a genetic predisposition, a genetic potential, if you like. So you might have a genetic potential to get to 185 centimeters tall. So really quite tall. That's like 6'2", 6'3". Okay, but if you don't get the right nutrition growing up, or you're very ill when you're young, so you don't have the energy to put into your growth spurts, you're never going to reach your genetic potential. So there is a big environmental influence on the size you can get to. But if we compare that to weight, and by weight I'm talking about obesity, I'm talking now about laying down fat cells in your body. Weight, I'm going to put way over that on the environmental side. Not entirely though. Some people think you only get fat if you eat too much and you don't exercise, which is essentially true, but there is still a genetic influence here. Some people metabolize excess calories far faster than others, so are less likely to put on weight. Some people metabolize them really slowly, so can eat the same amount as another person, but they will put on weight and get fatter. However, it is still very much on the environmental side, because you still actually have to eat, put the calories into your body for them to turn into fat cells. Fat cells are only created from excess calories that you put into your body. So if you don't want to get fat, don't put the excess calories in, or increase how many calories your body requires by doing exercise, so the excess aren't turned into fat cells. Okay, not what I'm saying is anything wrong with being fat or anything wrong with being thin. Most important thing is being happy. But of course, from the biological point of view, obesity is down to environmental more than genetics. If we're looking at intelligence, this is a really interesting one, because I'm going to put intelligence there, quite a long way towards environmental, but with a heavy genetic influence. Because yes, if you don't go to school, if you're not challenged by your parents, if you're not sort of nurtured and given problems as a kid and helped with puzzles and things like that, you're never going to be as intelligent as you could be, because you haven't got your brain to practice. And as with all things, the more you practice, the better it gets. But some people have massive genetic advantages when it comes to intelligence. If you've got really good insulating layers around your neurons, your signals can go faster. If the gaps between your neurons are smaller, the signal can jump quicker. You can literally think faster. You can make different types of neurotransmitter in the brain, slightly different shaped versions of the proteins. Some might work better. So actually your brain can function better and faster under genetic influence. However, even if you've got genetically an amazing brain, if you're not educated, if you don't use it, if you don't practice and put your brain to work, it's never going to reach the intelligence levels that it should. And I would say environment is way more important than genetics when it comes to intelligence. So work hard. Overall, though, what we're talking about is that we're all very different due to infinite variations. And those infinite variations are possible when you combine genetic and environmental influences. And from a survival point of view for our species, variations are a really, really good thing, because if there's changes in our environment, variation makes us far more adaptable to that change, and we're more likely to survive. So variation is a really, really good thing. So I'll leave you with this quote. It's from Jo Cox, who was a British MP who was murdered a few years ago. But she said, "We're far more united and have far more in common with each other than things that divide us." She was murdered for her views by a guy who was far right, didn't believe in that kind of thing. She was an amazing person. She believed that we should nurture and appreciate all of the variation that there is around us, because it seems to be the only way we're going to survive as a species. So last slide very quickly, just to link this into the kind of bigger picture. There's so much variation largely because of evolution, because over millions of years, creatures adapt to survive and succeed in the environment that they find themselves in. Those that don't evolve die. This is the kind of survival of the fittest idea that we'll do more of in the next couple of videos. We know that Homo sapiens first evolved in Africa about 300,000 years ago. So we first adapted to suit that environment. But we then spread around the world. Here's a map showing the migration routes that humans and hominids took over those 300,000 years. And we spread out everywhere and went into loads and loads of different habitats. And those who stayed in each area evolved to suit that one. Those that moved on evolved to suit a different area. But all over the planet, there's these different biomes that we live in. You've got rainforests, deserts, tundra, woodlands, grasslands, savanna, all these different places. And in each one of those, we were required to adapt and evolve in different ways to survive in those areas. So really, all of this variation is all about surviving. Okay, from here, move on to evolution 2, and we'll start looking at evolution theory much more properly and from a more scientific point of view. And we're going to look at evolution, adaptation and competition, which are two fundamental parts of evolution. Please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Like this video if you found it useful. And go and visit my Facebook page for some more random bits of biology that you might find useful. Thank you.